Hi, it's me, Bill Patton, and I'm going to be presenting a quick webinar here. It might be 30 minutes or maybe a little bit more. And what I'm going to do is start you with a quiz, and I really would love it. I would love it if everybody could get 100% on this quiz. But what it'll do is it'll help you to understand maybe some things that you are not complete in your understanding of visual training, just like they were not complete in mine. In fact, I'm learning new things all the time about visual research and what are players' capacities and whatnot. So, it's really a great thing to get into because it's such a big part of growing the game of tennis. It's going to be very vital for people to be able to go and become legitimate tennis players and then also matriculate upwards through the levels. So here goes the quiz really quick. And if you want this emailed to you, just go ahead and send me your email and I'll shoot this over to you. And then you can answer back with what you think your answers are. All right. Number one, which body part is most necessary to be able to play good tennis? A, legs, B, eyes, C, arm, D, hand. Number two, true or false? There is a universal visual tennis instruction that applies to all players. Three, what is the thing that most players universally are not doing that they think they are doing? A, watching the ball. B, keeping their eye on the ball. C, using focus. D, see the ball out of opponent's frame. Number four, when you use the phrase watch the ball, it means almost nothing. A, almost nothing. B, figure it out on your own. C, scanning. D, focusing. E, A and B. F, C and D. 5, there are different ways of seeing that affect players tremendously in specific skills. For seeing the ball best, which pair is most important to understand? A, pure and cross-dextral. B, near and far-sighted. C, focus and pinpoint. D, blurred and focused. And finally, number 6, when is the best time to focus on the ball? A, from the time the opponent hits. B, once the ball crosses the net. C, from the bounce into the frame. D, at all times during the point. So that probably came pretty quick at you. So send me an email. I will get you on my list and I'll send you this out. It's just a quick copy and paste for me. And then you can take a moment to think those questions over. So tennis isn't growing. This is what we know. Tennis is not growing. We're losing as many athletes as we gain. So my contention is that the largest percentage of people that we don't retain in tennis, it's because they don't have success because we aren't teaching the visual skills as well as we could. So what am I going to go over in this webinar? We're going to talk about the first moments on the court. We're going to talk about defining success, why people should rally in the first 10 minutes, each level, new visual challenges, 100,000 athletes and no two the same. We don't teach pure dextral or half the population very well, and cross dextral not much better. The sum of players' experiences are equaling frustration. And there seems to be an asteroid field at 4.0, and stagnant players seem to move on. The highest levels require the most varied skills. All right, so let's dig in. Let's talk about the first moments on the court. There's this thing called the affective filter. And what that means is that players who are feeling anxious, nervous, a little bit worried, they're not going to perceive the ball as well. So, job one for us as coaches is actually to create a low anxiety atmosphere for people to enter into. Now, one thing that I do when I first get a player on the court is, I talk to them for a moment. We have a very brief little hello and just a very pleasant moment of welcoming them in, finding out how did everything go. If they're running late, I let them know, hey, um, you're a little bit late, but that's okay. We're going to make the best of this time. If I don't have a lesson right after that, then I'll give them a couple more minutes after. So I just want them to know that I'm going to do the very best for them and that they need not worry that they're going to get value from the time. And one thing that my very first students report back almost always is that the fact that we took a moment to be relaxed helped them at the very beginning of the lesson because they're going to see more clearly. There's a very strong correlation between high anxiety and a lack of accurate perception. So, we go to the net and we toss a few balls over the net, and it's very relaxed, and they're warming up their eyes, and we choke up the racket. We move another step back, and we just have a really easy dinking, pardon me, dinking rally, right? And that's really important because that makes us successful. And I do this with every player at every level. We just start with a very relaxed warm up, and that helps set the tone for the rest of the workout. And we can go progressively more difficult. And then once we go progressively more difficult, we look for a place where now success is not happening. So, what is success? This is an important thing to define. And it basically means that you're finding a place where your player has mastery. And then, if they're not successful 70 to 90% of the time, then they don't have mastery. So you need to dwell in that spot until they can get 70 to 90% successful. And maybe figure out what's happening, but generally it's going to be because you went to a level that was a challenge level that they weren't quite ready for and they need a moment of adjustment. Sometimes they just overcome that on their own because it's a challenge and they accept the challenge and then they move past it. But sometimes you need to diagnose what it is with their visual system that is creating the difficulty. Now, one thing that I agree with very much is the idea that we must get our new players rallying within the first 10 minutes. And I know that there are people out there who say if we are, 5 feet from the net, each of us, and having a little ball back and forth, going back and forth, some of you will say that's not a rally. And I think it is. And I think that my experience with my players is that they derive a tremendous amount of satisfaction and they're borderline surprised that they could keep the ball going, right? And then once we can have a 10-shot rally from very up close, then we move back to the service line and we attempt to have a 10-shot rally from there. And so it's these little 10-shot rallies that then we can go progressively further back in the court. And there's sort of once you reach that threshold, then you have success. And what you find is that as you go further back, the visual challenges are more difficult. So So let's talk about that. Each new level has new visual challenges, right? So the further you are back in the court, then the more variable the ball's flight can be because the wind takes more effect on it. Um, the bounce of the ball is higher. The speed and trajectory of the ball have a greater impact on how high and fast the ball is traveling. So up close, simple, from the tee, uh, probably 50% more difficult, right? From the tee to rallying from the rectangle of death, and I don't call it no man's land, you know, 100% more challenging. It's twice as challenging. And then you move all the way to the baseline. And again, that's twice more challenging, 100% more challenging. So those challenge levels need to be met. And the system, which I teach, the system of how vision shifts from contact to the ball coming out by 2 feet to what happens next to the bounce of the ball into the racket and then back. That plays a big role in that. So that's in the course, and I strongly recommend that you go to the course. And at the end of this, you're going to get an invitation to get a free video, which is the top 3 most common and catastrophic errors that people make and how to fix them immediately. So that's going to be right down there at the beginning and free to you. You just have to go through like maybe a minute and a half introduction video, put your email in there, and then the free mini course there is going to come right into your email. Now, one of the top uh, researchers in the area of vision for athletes has tested over 100,000 athletes and found that no two have the same visual strengths and weaknesses. So, in their different capacities, I mean, there's awareness of your surroundings, there's the ability to focus, there's the ability to track. Uh, there's lots of different things about vision, and everybody's different. So when somebody has a simplistic idea of what it is to see the ball, um, then they're off track because your simplistic argument about how to see the ball, if you say watch the ball or keep your eye on the ball, it really doesn't mean anything. So because you're you're a unique individual with your strengths and weaknesses, and if you're projecting that onto other people, then you're missing the boat. Okay. So and and if you're listening to someone who's doing that to you, then you're also missing the boat. You're just not getting what you need. That's why the course is so important because it goes through a very wide range of skills and ideas and thoughts and sort of some mindset shifts that people need to go through in order to be able to see the ball well. All right, now there are 2 main ways that people differ. And in my experience, it's about 50-50. About half the population is pure dextral and the other half is cross dextral. Now, we hold up Federer as as an example of what you should always do. You should always be like Roger. And Roger, I do believe, is cross dextral, and that's why he looks at the ball, and looks it all the way into his frame, and you can see the still head, right, at contact. But then you look at Serena Williams, and her head is almost always ahead of contact. So, oh, that was interesting. That was fun for a second. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that. But Serena, great champion, one of the greatest players of all time, obviously. If, some people argue that she is the greatest female player of all time, but I'm not going to get into that argument right now. But she clearly looks at a place ahead of contact, and that would indicate to me that she's pure dextral. And you'll see Grand Slam players who have won Grand Slams who are compared to Federer, and because they're looking ahead of contact, then they get a red X over their picture. Well, Federer gets a green circle. So there's a skill that comes with pure dextral. We don't teach it very well. If you're pure dextral, you need to know what that is. And if you're a coach, you need to know the difference between teaching pure and cross dextral. Okay, that is also in the course. Now, we go into the sum of experiences. So, one piece of research that I recently stumbled upon is from baseball batting. And batters, it's actually impossible, they say, for a baseball batter to see the ball well enough to hit it. And so what actually happens for good hitters is they rely on their memory. So they've seen so many pitches. They've seen fastballs and sliders and curveballs and changeups and other exotic pitches. And so they're using their memory of the delivery of the pitch to be able to predict what's coming. And that's what is, and also they study patterns that pitchers have. And so they sort of begin to predict what's coming next before the pitchers even started their delivery. So, they've got a prediction and then they're looking for confirmation, and then there it is. So that kind of skill is very important, and it's when pitchers pitch average pitches that batters are more successful because they're more accurate in their prediction. So this sum of experiences either leads to success or frustration, and the way it plays out in tennis is, uh-oh, another high backhand, which I hate, and now I'm making another error, and now I'm not having fun. People get tired of making the same error. They a lot of quite often what will happen is a player will be at the net, they'll have a ball all lined up for a volley that they think should be a winner. They're using the wrong visual skill, and they net that volley again, and now they are beating themselves up, and they're thinking that their doubles partner hates them, and that the other team's laughing at them, which could all be true. It might not be, but it could be true. And that's a bad place to be. But there are visual skills that need to be taught so that people can be much more successful at that particular situation and have better experiences and a more confident way of playing at the net. And that's part of what explains the asteroid field at 4.0. There just seems to be this really difficult thing to overcome. And there's a significant difference in the speed of the ball from a 4.5 to a 4.0 level player. But not only that, but the wider variety of spins comes into play, because 4.5 players and above have the ability to hit different kinds of spin on their serve, and even vary the way they deliver successfully into the court. Not like players at lower levels can't hit spin, but more advanced players are more able to widely vary what they do on purpose, which makes reading and reacting to the ball more difficult, and keeps players playing at the 3.5 and 4.0 level because they just can't seem to pick up and read and react to that shot. So, if you want to be a 4.5 player and above, then you need the advanced visual skills, the 5.0 visual skills, to be able to move up. And that's part of my own story. I mean, I was stuck at a certain level for a little bit. I began to learn about visual skills, but My learning of visual skills came just in bits and pieces. I would go to conferences and I would get a little something over here from this guy, and then I would get a little something over there from that gal, and then another guy would teach me a little piece. And now I've compiled a lot of it, and then also scoured the internet for research. And now, even in the last couple of weeks, I've learned a lot more, and that's going to be showing up shortly. So there will be more content available, right? But the course right now has a very wide range of things that will help people for sure. So I would say that there I haven't, created 50% more content, but there will be some nuanced material that's going to be coming soon. And I've already written the fourth edition of the book. I'm pretty sure the next one's going to be called edition 4.1. All right. So, and now it's time to talk about stagnancy, because of that difficulty of getting from 4.0 to 4.5. Then what happens is then players get frustrated of playing at the same level all the time, never improving. And so they move on, and they might move on in different ways. They might just quit tennis, period. Or they might begin to play pickleball, which is not a bad thing for clubs that have pickleball programs. Uh, I myself prefer spec tennis, and I'll put a link to spec tennis in there, but you can play spec tennis on a pickleball court, and it actually more closely resembles tennis. It has tennis rules. You can serve overhand. Uh, and that so it's and then there isn't a kitchen. That's one thing that really drives me nuts is the kitchen in pickleball. It's like, wait a minute, I'm up here and I want to hit a crazy angle volley, and you won't let me, right? Well, anyway, but I digress. So the point being that without learning advanced visual skills or even fundamental visual skills, then players stagnant, become stagnant early, and then they also then move on from the sport. And so we're losing people in two places. One, they're not becoming legitimate tennis players who are capable of playing a match. And two, they're stopping, sometime around 3.5, 4.0, fed up, can't get any better, frustrated that they made that umpteenth volley error at the net, or freaked out because a shot coming high to their backhand, they couldn't deal with it. And we touched on this before, but I just want to finish with this, is that the thing that you see at the highest levels are the greatest visual skills. So, like, an example would be the legendary story of Andre Agassi, going and to the batting cages and routinely hitting 95-mile-an-hour fastballs, like it was nothing, because, you know, part of his traumatic upbringing was facing the monster of the ball machine that was, shooting balls really fast at him all the time. And that's not such a nice thing, but it did give him a capacity to see fast moving objects really well. Not something I would recommend that you do to your children. Now, the other another interesting anecdote was the time when Federer more or less taunted Andy Roddick and said, "Hey, Andy, hit it as hard as you want. I'll return it," because um, Federer had learned to, not only see Andy serve well, but he was just, able to just touch it back and use all the power that Andy gave him. So Roger, a part of the magic of Roger, more or less dominating Roddick for a period of time there, was that he could return Andy's serve. And that's sort of amazing when regularly that ball was coming, 135 to 145 miles an hour. And so, um, anyway, right now, this is awesome. So I'm getting somebody who's joining the webinar right now, and we're going to talk. All right. And so here we go. I've wrapped up my presentation, and welcome to Poida. How do I say your name there? Let me unmute you. Ask to unmute. So, hello there.
Good day.
Good day.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you to start your video too.
Oh, I'm gonna have to go without video.
That's fine. Okay, sir. Tell me how you say your name.
Poida.
Poida. I just didn't want to assume. I didn't want to say it wrong because, those extra vowels.
Yeah,
And
it's
throw people off.
actually I used to live in Australia, and so when I tell people my name was Peter, they'd go, "Oh, hi, good day, Poida." I said, "Okay, that's fair enough," because
That's interesting.
they have a cool accent. So I said, I
Sure.
like that. We'll stick with Poida.
All right. I know, I like that story. All right. So, you're coming in, you're at the halfway point. I'm actually wrapping up, but what I'd
Oh, it's
like
a
to,
half an hour. Yeah.
yeah, so I'm wrapping up, and it's you and I. So what I did is I went through a presentation, and I'm going to post this a little bit later, but so what I'd like to do now, though, is handle any questions that you might have about visual training. So, is there something? What is it that interests you about this field? Any specific questions you have for me?
Sorry, Bill. Who? How many of you got joined in this chat?
It's you and I.
Oh, it's you. Oh, so you're okay. Yeah.
so I just got done, just talking into the camera, and I'm going to post it on my YouTube later, and promote the webinar better for next week. But I'm happy you're here, and so I mean, you and I can have a nice little discussion right now.
Well, that sounds great. And now, so here's my question.
Okay.
Why do you think, in your opinion, there has not been an American male win a Grand Slam since Andy Roddick last did it in 2003 or whenever he did it?
Okay. So, from the standpoint of visual training,
anything, and I would say that's a part
yeah,
of it.
yeah. I mean, I will answer that, but what I'm really looking for are questions specifically targeted at the visual training aspect. That's what this webinar is about.
Right.
I think there are a number of different factors. One, the success of other nations. People point to the fall of the Berlin Wall and the freedom of Eastern Europe, because now Eastern European players have been so much more successful. So that level of competition. I mean, look at all the people who came successfully from the former Balkan crisis, and came out of a war-torn country, and then took that and turned it into a tremendous amount of determination to do really well, right? So there's a ton of Serbs and Croats and and Bosnians who have come on to the tour who've done quite well. So, so there's that, and then I think Andy Roddick also said this. He said, American kids aren't ready for when they're, up against a kid, and you're in their home country, and the referee is the home country, and the opponent is the home country, and all the calls are going against you. So American kids aren't ready for that kind of adversity. Nor, he said, when you have a 17-year-old kid from Russia who is playing because if he doesn't win, he won't be eating tonight. So that's part of it. Also, I think culturally in the U.S., I mean, we we are having a problem of character. We haven't we're not training our kids with a high level of adversity and difficulty. I mean, I just saw an interesting post from Michael Joyce where there was a 2 hour delay because it was 84 degrees.
Mhm.
And I'm like, no, these kids need to be able to play when it's 107 and get through that and have to hit a at 6-7 in a third set tiebreaker to have sweaty sunscreen salt go in their eye and successfully hit a second serve to save match point. That's what we need. So we're kind of dumbing it down. We're playing these, best of 2 set matches with a 10-point tiebreaker, and the kids aren't learning to overcome adversity because I don't know who's driving it. I believe parents are trying to create too much of a fairness. It's not fair that my child had to play a 3.5 hour match in his first round, and now he has a second round match in the same day against someone who won 6-0, 6-0. Well, sorry, it's the way it goes. So anyway, there's my.
Yeah,
That's. I mean, I think that's it in a nutshell. We're just not. We're not. Our system's not set up to drive character development.
I agree with a lot of those points. I think they're very valid. Um, you know, and it gets to the visual training. That this part is a big part of it as well. Um, I really think at the end of the day, it comes down to coaching, and the coaching model here in North America, in the U.S., Canada, it's a business, and coaches are more often concerned with client care and making sure they provide the feel good lesson. And I think it speaks to Andy Roddick's point about adversity. But at the end of the day, the coaches here in the U.S. And Canada would be part of that. They're just not doing the job. And
I would say Canada is handing our lunch money to, stealing our lunch money here in the US. Canada is producing so many more fine
well,
players per capita than we are in the US. So,
I'm
and
from Canada, so I can speak
okay,
to that. That's a
all
load of
right.
bullshit. It's
Okay.
complete. You know
Well,
what? You,
you've
you
got
wouldn't
more
know.
players. Yeah. Yeah.
The
Anyway.
reason I know is because I've seen it. You
Yeah.
know who? You know who developed Denis Shapovalov?
Is.
His mother.
Okay.
His mother. Tennis. The tennis establishment didn't do it. His
Okay,
mother
well, no,
did it.
oh, yes. So I will agree with you that tennis establishments are not the answer. So yes, it's
Well, it's not just the establishments.
almost all great players are developed in a system or a private system or in a cadre of a sort of a lucky planting in the right place. So you'll see in certain countries, that there will be all of a sudden a group of 3 to 5 to 12 players that emerge together, and then they all build on each other. And then what will happen is you get this copycat thing where people then all want to know, hey, what do they do in Spain? Hey, what do they do in France? Hey, what do they do in, wherever that place is? But it was sort of a sort of a lucky thing, a numerical anomaly that there just seemed to be this group of players that grew up together and beat each other up for a period of time, and they all got really good.
Yeah, and certainly that's a part of it. But see, that had nothing to do with coaching. That was the players. And I know from my experience playing other sports, a coach didn't make me better than the player I was. It was the guys that took me under their wing and helped me. And I learned from them. I said, how do you make that shot? And they would show me. And it was by playing against kids that were way better than me that I was able to elevate my game. The coaches were actually pathetic. They're ball feeders.
Mm.
A lot of these, and here's the thing about visual training: they don't do it. They
Well, yeah. Okay, so
drop
let's
feeding.
go into that a little bit more. Now, here's my contention. Yes, and so I'm going to let you speak a little bit more, but I just want to frame this a little bit. Is that um, I believe that visual training is fundamental to the idea that a player is going to even become a legitimate tennis player at all.
Absolutely.
And then the gateway to going up the levels is having increasingly advanced visual skills.
Absolutely. So here's the problem we have here. You get the coaching industry, call it the establishment. I don't care what term we want to use, but if you go around any neighborhood, anywhere in the country, you will see coaches with a basket of balls feeding the academy ball, perfect in the strike zone, drop feeding over and over again. And that ain't going to do it. That ain't going to do it. There needs to be a real focus on reception skills. And that's the visual training part. That's
Yes.
what's missing. And in Europe, why are they turning out so many better players? Well, it's not a business model there. If a kid is any good, they get support from the federation. They get support coming up through the system. And that doesn't cost the parents a ton of money the way it does here in North America. It's just there isn't going to be an American winning a Grand Slam, or if a Canadian does win it, it's because they got lucky. These people are immigrants to Canada. They were not born here. If you look at Pospisil, if you look at Milos was born here. Milos came when he was young. Bianca came from Romania. This is the part they don't talk about.
Right.
This is the insider stuff that they don't want people to know. None of these players were developed by local coaches and the federation. They were developed. Felix, his father's a coach. His father developed them.
Mm-hmm.
Dennis's mother played on the tour. I watched her coach him when he was 5 years old. And it was every day for 3 hours. And he would play sets and he would drill. And he is a good athlete. And that's why he is where he is.
Right. Well, and if you go back into American recent history, I mean, Roddick is the exception of the, homegrown kid.
Yes.
But one of the thing that helped him to overcome what were some very serious flaws in his technique was his drive.
Yeah.
He drove himself to number one in the world. But then every other great American except for Jim Courier was the child of a first generation immigrant. So Pete Sampras, right? His parents immigrated.
Agassi.
Mike Agassi and Chang, and so that partly explains it. Is that? But now, anyway, I'm hoping to wrap this up. So if you have one more question or comment about visual tennis, then we can do that. Otherwise, I'm going to say goodbye.
Okay. I'm just trying to think here. What is the best visual exercise that you have found in your experience
Okay.
to do with kids or adults?
Okay, I think that's a great question. I'm not going to give you the answer that you want, and the reason is because.
There's no answer I want.
Okay, no, that's good. I appreciate that. I like that.
I have no idea what you're going to say.
Right, and
And
I'm
I
going to
have no
say,
expectation.
yeah, no, it's perfect. I appreciate that attitude a lot. I would say there is no one, because everybody's visual experience is different. The Probably the thoroughgoing top visual researcher for and trainer for athletes has tested 100,000 athletes and found no two with the same strengths and weaknesses. in their visual skills. So I think it's very personal. So what you would do uh, is you dig into this, you discover, you would test and find out what someone's relative strengths and weaknesses are, and train the strength first, use the strength, expand on it, and then go to the biggest, the largest manageable weakness and start to work with that, because some
Mhm.
weaknesses are not necessarily, it might be the biggest weakness, but it's not the most manageable. So, you have to be realistic about what you can get done. So, um, I will tell you this, that one best practice that coaches can do, that players can do, is when they first enter the court, if they have already done some mental preparation to create the lowest possible um, level of anxiety as they begin,
Good
uh,
point.
that that because there's this thing called the affective filter, and I discussed this earlier, is that as people's anxiety level goes up, then their ability to perceive and receive information goes down. It's a
Good
very
point.
strong correlation. So coaches and players can work to enter practice as a very low key situation, and then slowly ramp up until such time as there is a breakdown. And then you can pause and say, okay, why did things break down right there? And it's generally because there was a challenge level that was exceeding the capacity of the person to
Yeah.
cope. And then from there, then what you do is you strategize, you discover what was the breakdown, and you
Mhm.
work with it there. And it's generally something along the lines of anxiety, visual skills, or the pairing of the visual and the kinesthetic. So,
Yeah. That's a
that,
that's a great answer.
thank you.
Yeah.
So, anything else before we go?
Just sort of building on what you're saying, I couldn't agree more. I think one of the most neglected parts of coaching is the mental side. And I'm sure you've read The Inner Game of Tennis,
Yeah.
as probably everybody has who has seen it. If they're serious about tennis, that's a book you really have to read. And and it speaks um, to managing emotional regulation and anxiety. Have you ever heard of the
Wait,
term?
before you move on, I want to add something, because I'm a bigger fan of the second book, Inner Tennis, playing the game. And that book has is played a pretty large role in the development of my visual training course.
Which
And
book is it? Galloway's?
it's
Is it
Galway's second book,
second book?
Inner Tennis, Playing the Game. You can find it used.
Yeah.
It's on Amazon now, I do believe. And Sean Brawley, the only inner game of tennis coach certified in the world, has reviewed my book, Visual Training for Tennis, and said that I get it. So,
Mhm. That's
so
good.
you know, now the interesting thing, the way I would differentiate myself is I would say that I have taken inner game principles and not only expanded them and made them more into strictly the visual, but then also dug into the science that affirms those things. So some people, I'm on the court and people go, "Oh, you're like a Zen tennis coach." And I'm like, "Well, really, I'm a brain guy. I mean, I had my Zen period, but I'm just I just get into how does your brain work and how do you get out of its way so it can do what it's going to do." All right.
Mhm.
So, man, I really interrupted you big there, but go on with the rest of what you were going to say.
Have you ever heard of the term jumpy eyes?
That's new for me.
You might want to Google it and just see what you can find on it.
Jumpy
It's
eyes. Okay.
jumpy eyes, and I think it ties in with anxiety. that when people get anxious, their eyes start to jump around because you're perceiving a threat, and you have to figure out how you're going to manage it.
Yes,
So
threat detection and threat management is a big part of visual training for tennis.
yes, yeah,
Absolutely. And
yeah,
there's this thing called saccadic motion of the eye, which essentially grays out your vision. And if you think primally for a second, when someone was in a situation of extreme danger and they had to like run from a predator or whatnot, then necessarily your vision got clouded so that you wouldn't see all the branches that are going to scratch your face.
right. You just got to
You're
see the
only going to see
way.
the big stuff that could knock you out.
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah, because if you saw that detail, then it would deter you from escaping.
yeah.
So there's a very primal reason for that.
And I think this is one of the things that, when you watch tennis on TV and you hear McEnroe and whoever's doing the color commentary, they rarely ever talk about the importance of the eyes. And I don't get it. They don't clue into the fact that there's a reason Nadal and Federer and Djokovic are as great as they are. But people only see the visible skills. They don't see the invisible skills. And I know did you ever hear about the test they did on Agassi?
Well,
At the
before you talk about Agassi, I want to say I don't recommend listening to the announcers on TV to learn about tennis. Okay,
no,
go on with Agassi.
So there was a story that he was his vision was assessed at one of the Top Gun at the Top Gun training academy.
Yeah.
For fighter pilots.
Mm-hmm.
And he did the test that they're put through, and he exceeded the highest score of their best pilots.
It doesn't surprise me.
No,
And
not at all.
Obviously there was a traumatic past that comes with that. And we don't recommend that people fire 95-mile-an-hour shots out of a ball machine at their 5-year-old. But Agassi did come away with some amazing visual skills because of that. I mean, it could have been done much better and more humanely and whatnot. But there is value in that overtraining. So in fact, one thing that I'm about to start digging into is crazy overtraining, because the top sports visual trainer in the world right now does exhausting 10-minute eye workouts with people that far exceed their ability to perform them, and that she's finding that to be more effective than exceeding it by just a small margin. She just does stuff that in 10 minutes will just make you exhausted and you'll need to rest. So anyway, all right, I need to get going, but I really appreciate this conversation.
Yes,
It's webinar Wednesdays, so if you want to come on 9 o'clock, top of the hour, Pacific Standard Time next week, we'll be back here again, and I'll be covering another topic or a range of topics for visual training for tennis.
Sounds good.
Thank
Keep
you,
sending
Poida.
emails out.
Yes, will do.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. Thank you, Poida, for coming on for that conversation. It was fascinating. And we'll see you next week in the webinar.
Sounds good. Take care.